And to give us his views is our foreign affairs analyst, Richard Heydarian, who joins us live now from our Rockville studio. Good morning, Richard. A lot of interesting stuff happening. Well, let's begin with the Pag-Asa visit. Now, why the strong Chinese reaction to Lorenzana's visit there? You know, the Philippines has been there for many years. Why now?
Well, this was a major shift. If you look at the past 10 months, as far as the Duterte administration policy is concerned, we were giving more concessions to China while not really getting much in exchange, have we? So now suddenly you have the Duterte administration trying to draw the line in the sand and send a very clear signal to the Chinese that we're going to stand our ground and what is ours, and there's going to be no compromise on that specific issue. In fact, in many ways, I think what's happening here is indeed a good cop, bad cop situation whereby always signaled his interest in terms of reviving bilateral relationship. He will be going to China next month for the One Road, One Belt Summit, and he's going to meet President Xi Jinping and discuss major infrastructure investments by China. But on the other hand, he gave the go signal for the top two defense officials in this country, Secretary Delfin Lorenzana and, of course, Chief of Staff of the AFP, General Anyo, to go there to the Pag-Asa to inspect the area. And in fact, the Duterte administration has also done a major shift with respect to the previous administration. The Aquino administration was very strong against China in terms of waging a landmark arbitration case, but on the ground they didn't really do much to develop the Philippines' position. So now you have the Duterte administration allocating 1.6 billion pesos to develop the Pag-Asa and 1.3 to the airstrip. Now remember that airstrip was established back in 1977 under the Marcos administration, and over the past 4 decades we haven't seen much maintenance of that. So now we want to not only refurbish that but upgrade it from 1.3 kilometers to perhaps 1.5 kilometers. So now you have this concerted effort by the Duterte administration to strengthen the position of the Philippines on ground and also to develop the facilities for both military and civilian purposes. And of course now you have the Palace Malacanang also saying that this is part of a routine operations for the Philippines. And in fact, when the plane of Secretary Delfin Lorenzana was going to Pag-Asa, they were harassed by the neighboring Chinese military detachment in the Subi Reef, being told to get out of the area, but they stood the ground and they said that this is the Philippine airspace and China has no right get off. So I think the message also was clear here that as far as the Philippines is concerned, we're going to stand our ground, and resistance is an option. It doesn't mean that we're going to have war, nor is appeasement an option. So I think this is a major shift, and it's something that I think much of the Philippines has appreciated.
Last point there about the Chinese kind of calling attention to Lorenzana's planes going to Pag-Asa. Shara Zambrano on Friday had said that the officials there said that was standard protocol, that wasn't really anything alarming for them to kind of ask them to identify who they are and to remind them that Subi Reef is controlled by the Chinese. It seemed like a protocol dance that they had to do every time this happened because they go to whenever planes go to Pag-Asa. So what do you make of that, perhaps that these types of confrontations were overblown because that was part of standard protocol?
Well, I mean, it's been time since a Filipino defense minister, together with the Army Chief of Staff, going to Pag-Asa. It's been quite a while since that happened. And it's just recently that China has massively developed the Subi Reef, and Subi Reef is very close to Tito Island, or what we call Pag-Asa. And now as China develops a sprawling network of airstrips in the area, it is slowly trying to impose more and more restrictions on the freedom of overflight and freedom of navigation of other countries in the area. And of course, we also have reports that Chinese Coast Guard may have been also involved in harassment of Filipino fishermen, also in an unprecedented way, by also using live firearms. So you really have the news tightening around the Philippines and other claimant states. So I think the defense establishment in the Philippines is trying to stand its ground, and they have convinced President Duterte to give signal to show support for the people there. We have a whole community there in Pag-Asa. They have their own mayor. And of course, Pag-Asa is part of the Palawan province. So now you have the defense establishment in the Philippines saying it's time to send the right signal to the Chinese. And I think China was very disappointed because they thought that under the Duterte administration, they could get all the concessions they wanted. But this is huge news because in China, people are watching this very carefully and saying, well, we're offering the Philippines billions of dollars in terms of investments, trade, and aid, and all we get in exchange is for them actually to fortify their position in what the Chinese consider as part of their inherent and indisputable national sovereignty. So there's also some domestic policy here, and I think the Xi Jinping administration is very disappointed by this. And the fact of the matter is that this could be just a precursor for more assertive position by the Philippines, led by no less than Delphine Lorenzana.
Well, Richard, I hope you understand this because China and Vietnam, for example, have built facilities on disputed islands. That's not surprising. But when the Philippines tries to upgrade existing facilities on islands that it has occupied for many years, everyone starts saying this is, unusual, and there's a lot of outcry about it, and then the Philippines has to issue some sort of statement about it. Why is there a need to even justify this if it is a Philippine territory? It seems like all of this rhetoric around it is really unnecessary.
Well, just to keep things in perspective, actually Pag-Asa is outside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and per international law, of course, just because something is within your zone doesn't mean it's yours. But the fact that it's outside our exclusive economic zone should put things into perspective. And remember, we occupied that land feature through using military force, because in the 1970s, we were ahead of our neighbors. Now, you're absolutely right that, it's quite hypocritical for other claimant states to point their finger at the Philippines when they have already developed massive air bases in the area. China has 50-kilometer-long airstrips in Fiery Cross, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef in the area. The Vietnamese occupy 29 land features and have multiple airstrips to the area, and their first airstrip was established as early as 1973. So without a question. But the thing is this, we were always the only guy who was following the protocol and the rules. Remember, there's a 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, paragraph 5 or article 5 of which clearly says that countries should not engage in unilateral action that will security in the region. Guess what? The Philippines was the only country who was following that, and then now suddenly the Philippines is catching up with the norm. No one is following the law, so the normal situation here is that everyone is fortifying their position in the ground, not only the Chinese, but also the Taiwanese, the Malaysian, and the Vietnamese, so suddenly everyone is making big noise out of it. I think what the Philippines should have done over the past 4 decades is to consistently develop and upgrade the facilities. And remember, Tito Island is special because next to Ito Aba, it's the second largest land feature, naturally feature in the area, and in many ways it's indeed an island. So I think that is why it is also a price commodity, and the Chinese are really zeroing their eyes on the Tito Island. And I think the situation there is very alarming, because at some point the Chinese may have an ability to squeeze our people there so that we cannot resupply there, so we cannot support them until they will be forced out of the area. So I think Secretary Lorenzana and the defense establishment in the Philippines has sensed that sense of urgency, and now they're trying to develop the Philippines' position on the ground before it's too late.
Now, we just talked about the Chinese ship that allegedly attacked Filipino fishermen in Union Banks. Now, if that is proven true, the defense officials are still investigating that. What is the protocol there? How should the Philippines respond? Is there something existing that they should be following?
Well, the Chinese foreign ministry said that they're investigating the situation. I think they have felt the hit. They know that these things can really undermine the improving relations between the two countries and undermine the spirit of goodwill that Duterte has restored over the past 10 months. The reality is that sometimes, to be honest, a lot of us experts have doubts about how much China really controls its people on the ground. Remember, you have the massive Chinese Coast Guard, which is the biggest in the region and bigger than all other countries in the region combined. Now, there are at least 5 different agencies who have their own Coast Guard or semi-Coast Guard forces who are navigating through the South China Sea. And sometimes there have been major coordination problem among them. This is what they call the phenomenon of 5 dragons in the high seas. The bigger problem are the so-called militia cum fishermen. Some of them are supposed to be just fishermen, but they're actually well armed and they're organized as militia. So my problem is that sometimes it's not clear whether Beijing really knows what's happening on the ground, whether Beijing controls their own boys on the ground. So it's very possible, although not this incident was actually unilateral aggressive action by some hot-headed, trigger-happy folks in the Chinese Coast Guard, or people who were supposed to be Chinese Coast Guard, or perhaps were just militia forces. So the Chinese themselves are trying to get to the bottom of this. But this is a very serious problem, because many experts believe that if ever there'll be war in the South China Sea, it could be sparked by accidental clashes between some of these Chinese so-called Whitehall forces and some other countries' fishermen or Coast Guard or naval forces. So this is a very alarming situation. Thankfully, there was no casualty, but I think this underlines how serious the situation could be and how much of a tinderbox the South China Sea disputes are,
and you did
as it becomes more and more congested.
Indeed. And one final question for you, Richard. We were talking about the diplomacy, the soft diplomacy that President Duterte has been trying in terms of relations with China to increase investment and kind of just, not take a very provocative stance with China. But
right.
with incidents like these that we've been seeing reported, do you think they really will make a difference in terms of Chinese investment here? Because it is still a lucrative market for Chinese investors. Is this enough to really take the money away?
Well, definitely the Duterte administration is engaging in what you can call a hedging strategy, trying to combine engagement so that we can revive investment and trade relations with China, which is going to be very mutually satisfactory and beneficial, and at the same time engage in some sort of deterrence. That is why our military alliance with America is still intact, despite everything that Duterte has said against Washington and the former American administration. And that is why you have people like Lorenzana leading these efforts to fortify our position on the ground. Now, it's never an easy thing. It's a constantly evolving strategy. So this hedging strategy by the Duterte administration is going to be always between this yin and yang of engagement and deterrence. And of course, China correspondingly is going to also respond. Is going to also criticize the Philippines whenever they feel that the Philippines is undermining mutual trust. But the thing is this, the problem with China is that they tend to make huge pledges of investments and trade, and there's always this implicit expectation that in exchange, the neighboring countries will make political or geopolitical concessions. I think it's very important for the Duterte administration to make it clear that improvement of bilateral relationship by no means should be tantamount to the Philippines just giving up on its claims and relaxing its position on sensitive territorial and maritime issues, and that if China wants to invest in the Philippines, they're all the way welcome to do so, but it doesn't mean that the Philippines should go soft on its territorial position. So that's why it's very important for this administration to have a coherent signaling. And the problem sometimes is that you don't have that kind of coherent signaling, so you may also have wrong expectations on the part of China. So I think now China is beginning to appreciate that the Duterte administration doesn't mean appeasement, it doesn't mean surrender, it means hedging strategy and a combination of both deterrence and engagement. And I think this is a new reality that the Chinese have to appreciate.
Certainly a wake-up call for them, and we'll see what happens in May during the summit. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Richard Heydarian there, a resident foreign affairs analyst.